Thanks very much. Just to introduce myself, I'm the Vice Chair of the Trustees, and I wasn't here from the very beginning, but I know people, well, we all know the people who were.
Feels like you have.
And strangely enough, the story doesn't start right here. It involves goings on in Herne Hill and the theatre group, and a very interesting community engagement policy run by Lambeth back in 1999. So I'll just whiz to the first slide. Wow. So if you think of what Herne Hill looks like now,
yeah, I know,
and how things have changed, Friends of Windmill Gardens actually owes its genesis to something called the Brixton Area Forum, which operated from 2000 to 2006. And Brixton Area Forum, in the way that it operated, actually owes much to the Herne Hill Society. In 1999, Lambeth announced the formation of 5 town centre-based administrative hubs in North Lambeth, Clapham, Streatham, Norwood and Brixton, and each would have their own town centre manager, and they'd be running durable community engagement to see what should be done in each area. Now the Herne Hill Society at the time, they were concerned that the proposed Brixton Town Centre Forum would neglect areas such as Herne Hill and Tulse Hill, all being distinct communities with tangible needs. The first Brixton Town Centre manager, Jonah Greene, met the Herne Hill committee in March 1999 to hear their concerns. And although Lambeth made it clear they wouldn't add to its quantity of town centre managers, at a large and lively public meeting in September 1999, she and Jim Dickinson of Lambeth Council proposed the idea that the Brixton Town Centre Forum actually be constituted as a wider Brixton Area Forum, which would include Herne Hill and other local centres. And in the event, it was set up with working groups for the Herne Hill ward, Ferndale, Cold Harbour and Angel, now Loughborough Junction, and crucially for us, what was then called the Town Hall ward, covering Brixton Hill. There are also theme-based forums concerning things like traffic and transport, community assets, business forum, environmental quality. And I found a timetable of the area forum meetings over 2005. You can see it as a big operation. If I zoom in into each of the different groups, wow. They all met several times a year. And then you've got council at the bottom, community police consultancy. All that had to dovetail in with the forum meetings. So it was an impressively major initiative. And so part of this talk is more than about celebrating 20 years of just Friends of Windmill Gardens. It's a major projects group in the Area Forum, thanks to its open, easy to access structure and the administrative infrastructure provided by Lambeth. This included meeting spaces, materials, clerical services, which they all provided, and it tapped into interested people from the community to actually lead the meetings and make requests of the Secretariat as to what publicity material to put out and things like that. So it's almost as if Lambeth appointed clerical staff were at the beck and call of the community who were running these working groups. And a lot of long-lasting things have come out of that. The Herne Hill Working Group of the Forum, that was chaired by Giles Gibson, and he's still involved in the current version of the Herne Hill Forum. Projects included, they were very much instigated and involved with the what we now see as the outcome for the improvements at what they now call Station Square at Herne Hill. It also spawned the Blockwell Park Heritage Lottery Fund bid, And the Milkwood Road open space, who some people might know, and Milkwood Road actually got the first green flag for Lambeth sometime after it opened. And then the Cold Harbour and Angel ward was chaired by Tim Gaynor, and he's still active with the Loughborough Junction Action Group. And then the Ferndale ward, that was chaired by Liz Obi. She is a long-time activist and associate of Olive Morris, and then they're involved with the Paul Cross Road playground among various things. And the community assets chaired at one point by a woman called Julie Raymond. They were very much involved with saving what was then called Valley Hall for long enough for this condemned building by Windsor Square to be taken up, to be available and taken up by the Black Cultural Archives in subsequent years. And also they were involved with the refurbishment back at that time of the skate park in Stockwell, which has just been refurbished once again, sort of 20 years later.
I skated there.
And then there's the...
I skated there, sorry.
Right?
I lived there.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was there. First skater there.
And then there's the traffic and transport, which I chaired at one point, which is the primary public consultation for what was then called Central Square, but what was to shape up as the current Windrush Square. And also the Cross River Tram, but that was cancelled by Boris Johnson. So my own involvement was an interest in the emerging plans for Windrush Square. And I was just amazed when I turned up that I could just walk in off the street and join these meetings with council officers, the consultants, serious people having serious discussions about these things on a sustained basis. So just as an example, this was a poster which I think I probably prepared for one of the meetings I was chairing. And it goes through the whole timeline, several years worth of various consultations and things like that that took place. And right down the bottom, I've got "We Are Here," and then there's still a few more years to go with that. So it just goes to show that this area forum has enabled people to engage on a durable basis. It wasn't sort of fly-by-night consultations. It was something that really stuck around. And then, of course, Brixton Windmill. In the very first meeting of the town hall, come Brixton Hill Ward, the very first meeting of that took place on the 26th of July 2000, and it was chaired by someone called Joe Barker. Other attendees included local residents Richard Santieri. He had set up something called the Windmill Theatre Company back in 1999, and he had an idea that the Windmill could provide a base for a community theatre group. And so he is obviously very interested. Also at that meeting was Jean Kerrigan, Andy Weir, and Sue Aldis of the Blenheim Gardens resident management organisation. So already on that first meeting, the kernel of very, very much that has happened since. Oops, that's the Windsor Square and BCA before and after. I've got somewhat behind on my slides. And so yes, with the windmill, this is what it was like at that time. And among selected priorities were, from this first meeting of the town hall group, was the improvement of Windmill Gardens and the restoration of Brixton Windmill. And looking at this photo from Brixton Buzz, it's hard to imagine that, you know, this is where we are now. This is what it was like, just a couple of metres away from where
what was the building on the left?
That was a support building built in the 1960s, where Lambeth employed some employees to look after the park and open the windmill for schools groups. And that operated through the 60s and 70s, possibly the 80s, but it got very down that hill. If you look closely up there, you can see the roof is burnt out. Wow. And so the building...
Is it grass? Is it grass burnt out?
That's probably a balcony or something around the back. and that one of the first things was for that building to be taken down because it was just such a sad presence in the park, really.
There was also someone living in it at one point, homeless person. Yeah,
It's very close to the window, doesn't it?
yeah, it was close to the window.
Bit silly. It's like it's 60s, isn't it?
Yeah. And you might also notice on the right-hand side, the fence to stay and play was much more in front of the window.
Yeah.
And so the plans included moving that back. But that wasn't done for quite a long time afterwards, actually.
We get a fine Lambeth.
Yes, that was and at the meeting of the 19th of September 2001, Richard Santilli reported to the group that he had met structural engineers and English Heritage who were very concerned about the condition of the windmill, let alone everything else. And Lambeth's Environment Director at the time, Keith Tallentine, he presented a draft brief for tendering consultants and for developing a restoration project. And Jean, it's reported that Jean noted that the brief needed to include a reference to the park area as well as the windmill building, and that the consultation should engage and empower the local people. And at the next meeting in November, they agreed to proceed with the consultation. And then at the meeting, the first meeting of 2002 in February, Gideon Taylor from the Environment Department reported that 2 tenders had been received. And the group agreed to establish a dedicated project team to assess the bids and interview the consultants. And Joe Barker would chair that, and Jean would be vice chair of that subgroup of the Town Hall group.
Wow.
And so the in July 2002, the successful bidders were an architect a practice called Planet Earth, and they were introduced to the group. There had been some concern about the selection of publicity material by Lambeth, and it was agreed that the publicity for the consultation would actually be led through the Area Forum Working Group in the Brixton Town Centre office, which the working group could use for getting the materials done. But they also need that there was also an established need that the working group would have to take a more formalised role rather than just being a subgroup of the Town Hall working group. Again, placing equal importance of the park and the mill. In September 2002, it's reported that pigeons are still entering the windmill. The windows need to be sealed, and the building was now an English Heritage at-risk register, which you can see why with all that ivy and whatnot growing out of the cracks there. But Planet Earth ran a series of workshops which were quite intensive. It was several workshops throughout the summer of 2002, and then there's another picture showing the state of the playground in here. And if I zoom right in, you'll see the appalling state that the swings are in. Completely mauled by dogs. People with dogs used to exercise their dog's jaw strength by having them mauling the swings. It was really, really a sad situation there. So you can see there are various workshops, and interestingly enough, a windmill festival, which took place in September 2002. And so, yes, many a windmill.
Were they handmade?
Yes, I think there were. I don't know actually if they shop bought out. Penny might remember.
Workshop?
No, I think they bought
Workshop?
But there were some other quite innovative things happened. Yeah. You've got a photo of the sunflower on the windmill.
No, I don't actually.
Ah, well,
No sunflower.
tell you about that after it's gone.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. That's okay. And then soon after that, in early October, the Brixton Hill Working Group of the Forum, they actually formed the Brixton Windmill Committee. 13 people met who wanted to be part of the steering group in the planning process that this Planet Earth were developing. And this included Steve Double, who had a studio, one of the studios in Windmill Gardens there. And he had actually become the first chair of Friends of Windmill Gardens as that formed. And early in the new year of '03, the next meeting, they said the working group welcomes the draft report so far, and so sees the way forwards as a Friends of the Windmill or suitably constituted management group. In March that year, they discussed the options for the legal status of a Friends group to oversee the larger parts of the project and be involved with any land-based made appointments. Joe Barker stood down and Richard Santieri and Jean were elected as chair and vice chair of the Brixton Hill Working Group. In May that year, they reported to the Forum that the Friends of Windmill Park, as it was written in that record, well I think it's Gardens from North, was launched on the 29th of April 2003 with 40 people present, which is an impressive attendance by any standards. And then, before switching from the story from the Brixton Area Forum from Friends of Windmill Gardens, it's worth noting how the strengths of this engagement policy were recorded in notes from the Brixton Area Away Day in October 2006. And the strength said, getting local people involved, giving people power to carry out action and take responsibility. The strength of the Brixton Area Forum is that people become engaged in their areas and can be invigorated to set up their own groups and do things locally. Community is more creative than council engaging with people and more flexible. And it's not party political. There's a low turnover of participants in various projects, and therefore the sound knowledge base is built up among the groups. And as time went by, members of the Area Forum and the groups that it spawned found that while council administrations and officers came and went, we were always still there and carried the issues and the corporate memory forward. And I think it was a really enlightened policy by Lambeth Council at the time. It arose at the time when Heather Rabatz was CEO of Lambeth, a Jamaican-born British solicitor and the youngest CEO at the time. And she is acknowledged for bringing a period of business-like stability to council affairs after quite tumultuous times earlier. But I haven't had access to the archives with it this year, so I don't know how personally she was involved in the setting up of this area forum and this engagement mechanism. But she's since gone on to form, she is a co-founder of Empower Agency, which works in constructive ways for local authorities to do business and engage still, and is chair of Time's Up UK, which works for safe, fair and dignified situations for women. And so her career does show a strong interest in improving the lives and empowering the lives of citizens. And the Brixton Area Forum had challenges as well as the strengths. It didn't fit well with the council's bureaucratic structures. And by 2006, Lambeth wanted to reduce its financial and staffing commitment because it was pretty major. And Joan Negrini moved on to the Olympic Delivery Authority, and then Croydon Council, where she eventually became chief executive. Mind you, Croydon isn't the great example.
There's mothers in the crowd.
Yes. And then the next town centre manager was Chris Sapidius, who is on the right-hand side of this photograph. And she was much appreciated for having a very community-facing.
Bingo.
I told you before, there'd be a couple of wouldn't show this one. She had a very community-facing character. This scene shows outreach and progress at the Lambeth Country Show. Also an important place for Friends of Windmill Gardens during that period, of which more a little bit later.
Very grubby vesture wearing.
A very?
Very grubby vesture wearing.
No, it's tie and dye.
Like the gentleman in the black, is he dressed up as fancy dress?
No, it was.
The old Bill.
Do you remember who he was, Jean? You might recognise him.
Is he alright?
The one with the medal on the left.
What about the old
So
Bill?
he's a familiar face.
Yeah.
And that's a community police officer. The one in the middle, she is one of the Area Forum stalwarts.
Yeah, I know.
As
her
well, I've
face.
forgotten her
I know,
name.
I've forgotten her name,
I've
but she
forgotten
was
her name.
part of the youth forum and
He was
also
brave,
that
yeah.
cultural archives people, yeah.
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 And Chris was sort
Really
of
brave, isn't he?
So,
Yeah.
Brixton.
So, in the end, the Area Forum was rationalised back to a town centre forum as per the original idea. But Herne Hill Forum was already operating as a very independent entity by then, so they were fine. The Cold Harbour Angel Group went on to be the current Loughborough Junction Action Group. And they're credited with bringing a lot of investment into the Loughborough Junction area. Projects incubated at that time include the Loughborough Farm, Grove Adventure Playground, the Platform Cafe, and the We Are Loughborough Junction project that ran about 10 years ago, which some people might remember. Lambeth reduced the commitment even further by dissolving the Brixton Town Centre Forum and just holding occasional Brixton stakeholder meetings chaired by the Town Centre manager. So unwittingly or otherwise, a very enlightened and productive policy by Lambeth, the tangible benefits which remain with us to this day came to a close. And the Brixton stakeholders, they found it unacceptable that there's this complete withdrawal. So they went on to form the Brixton Neighbourhood Forum in 2011, which still operates and connects people and deals with issues of common concern. There's much in the last 20 years that could be celebrated from where all this came from this very brief and very productive, yet little acknowledged part of Lambeth's history. And this lack of acknowledgement also, or knowledge about that time, is intriguing because I went to the archives to try and find more information on the Area Forum matters. And he told me that the town centre offices weren't designated for being collected into the Lambeth archives. And so as it turns out, because Jean and I never get around to throwing away our old papers, he's asked us to supply the Lambeth archives with all our material from those days of the Brixton Area Forum.
Well, that ain't cricket.
And Brixton, it remains very fertile ground for community action. There's this links page from the current Brixton Neighbourhood Forum shows. If you go on brixtonneighbourhoodforum.org, on the links page you'll find no end of local organisations, many ones for Brixton beginning with B. The next page has all the friends of various libraries, Parks Group, Winter Square, Garden Museum and various others. And yet another page that goes on and on. And so you can see that the opportunities for community involvement around here are extensive. There are so many available, and it's really with immense gratitude that we can count so many people who chose to give so much to Brixton Windmill Gardens.
Have a drink, Nick.
Thank you. I just bit my tongue. And so, the Friends of Windmill Gardens itself this is our first, I think, to my knowledge, piece of promotional material.
This is our first. At the beginning.
I think it's the first flyer that came from Friends of Windmill Gardens. And this was in 2003. This was under the leadership of local residents. The first chair was Steve Double, who I mentioned before, who was in the Forum Working Group. Vice Chair Tara Herman, who I don't think I met.
She was inspired.
Ah, okay, right. And the treasurer was Richard Santiri, of which you'll hear more and see more. So I mentioned that first meeting had 40 attendees at St Saviour's Hall. There are 5 there in that meeting who still play very active roles in our activities. Jean Kerrigan, Donna Lister, Penny, Alan Piper and Jill Leys, and more who played key roles for many years to come, such as Andrew Weir, Magdalene Rubakava, of which more later, Nick Catterall, and Richard again. The second meeting was also well attended, and plans were made for the first of several benefit nights at the Windmill Pub. And they've supported us throughout the years with other benefit gigs and other support, such as our being able to grab their beer garden tables for the Beer and Bread Festival and things like that.
Or dance singers.
Or, yes, always very helpful. And so, almost 20 years ago to the weekend, give or take 1 or 2, was our first Friends of Windmill Gardens Windmill Festival. With many attractions and things, as you can see. And the photograph is of flamenco dancers who became very much a staple of the early festivals through various contacts who were in the Friends. I see there's also line dancing and storytelling, poetry, the balloon race, bouncy castle, etc. So it's quite touching to see just a week after our Harvest Festival that this is where it all started.
Brilliant.
And the Friends also joined the many other societies who exhibited at the Lambeth Country Show that summer. And they signed up 35 new members just by having a stand up there. Practically, before we had huge range of goods to sell and things like that, but it really engaged people to suddenly learn about this windmill and that this project was just starting up, and it caught people's attention. And that Windmill Festival was a great success with 1,100 visitors. I don't know if the limit on the people of the park had been established by that time, but it set a good precedent for the sorts of figures we've enjoyed since then. To get things off to start in terms of the organisation, funding was gained from Lambeth's Opportunity Fund, the Neighbourhood Renewal Fund, and they appointed a person called Ian Sesnam, who some of you in the room will know and remember. He's been appointed as a consultant at various key times throughout the years, and as a paid project worker to start working out how to manage the consultant survey and the report on the condition of the windmill by Dorothea Restorations, which I think Jim put the report out on the table on the far left, so you can see what the concerns about with the condition of the windmill were at that time. Ian advised that we create subgroups to facilitate an efficient way to tackle the sheer variety of tasks. So at that stage, there was a group to look at heritage matters and looking at how to raise what was thought the 1 million plus needed to restore the windmill at that point. The figures changed substantially over the years. Bringing the park back into use with a new community education centre and building and a new sports pitch, got some of those, not all. And planning to continue varied activities on an ongoing basis in the park and keep local people involved. And look at the governance of the windmill and the gardens to enable more community control over what's an important resource for the whole of Brixton. And so these sort of have translated through to our current main key objectives, sustaining the windmill, improving the park and having an education centre here. And also the subgroups that we have, like the parks and the education and the heritage subgroup. And this piece of work was the setting the ground really for the funding bids to go in with Lambeth Council to get serious heritage lottery money for the, there's some more pictures of the festival. So there's Steve Double there, Keith Hill you'll recognise. I've forgotten the two other characters in one of the official.
That was the Conservative Environmental Councillor.
Yeah.
She and her husband were both councillors.
Right.
Do you remember this? What their names were?
Yes.
And the one on the right is Kate McGrath, who was the treasurer by then, yeah.
Okay.
And she's still around. She's a life member, yeah.
Yeah. And so as well as all the fun, there's all the delivery stuff. And we all like a good delivery plan.
What's delivery?
Making stuff happen.
About consultation, people.
And working out what has to happen to make things pan out with the restoration. There are lots of steps you have to go through, getting engineers, getting the reports, and so as well as having all the fun, you have to sit down and go through this. And it's interesting looking through this, particularly at the end. The hope is that HLF will make an earlier decision and construction on the windmill and the education centre can begin August, September 2006 and be complete by Christmas.
Yeah, right. I believe that. I'm looking at 13.
So the first part of the plan did more or less run to schedule. It was the getting of the grant, which stretched out for quite a long time. And we eventually did get the grant in 2010.
March 2010, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That took a long time.
And even back then, the other objective of the education building, that was still a pipe dream. But it served its purpose. It was an intensive piece of work, and then it had to spread out while we were sorting out the Heritage Lottery Fund. And so Ian finished his role in September 2004, and the meeting recorded, thanks to Ian, an agreement that we wouldn't have got so far without him. And his remarks are written on the right. FoW has a tough job. It was never going to be easy. Be careful of what you take on, measure each task and give each other support. And still never a truer word said around this project. And particularly as we've gained so much since then, so there's so much more to sustain and we're still eager to develop. So the words still ring very true. And the project wouldn't have been possible without both the big vision being kept realistic just by taking one or two of the smaller steps at a time. So while the delivery plan might have slowed down at that point, there are still people in the background working with the Heritage Lottery Fund applications. And in 2004, Dorothea produced a report on the windmill machinery, which recommended various repairs to the cap, masonry, the sails, to safeguard the building even until more funding could be raised for a full restoration. It's worth noting at that time, though, the idea of bringing the mill into full working order to drive the stones by the sails, with the sails, was actually under consideration. In the event, the fact that parts of the windmill had been brought in during the 1960s, part restoration, and never had been intended for full operation. One example is the centrifugal governor weights clash on the tentering lever, so it's actually not currently engineered to work, even if we tried to make it work. And not to mention the immense health and safety implications of having all that whirling around meant that that was taken off the agenda. But we'll see later that the 1902 modular mill has been serving us very well anyway. Work to improve the park also got off to an early start. Where volunteers we had volunteers from the BBC who came along and repainted the playground equipment. Events in 2004 included a five-a-side football competition, which was run quite a few times after that, which involved 130 people. The second festival in July, which reported 1,200 attendees, and an archaeological dig.
Was there a report made from the archaeological dig?
Yes.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah, we must have it.
I think there's a link to it on our website. Is there?
Oh, right.
If not,
Oh,
it does
useful to
exist.
know.
I wonder what they found.
A lot of pottery.
Yeah, they found sort of pottery.
But when I came up here to see it, they had extended it to a lot longer
Trench.
Yes.
Because they found a lot of masonry underground. But
Yes.
they didn't know what it was.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to see what the report said.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was probably from the second dig,
Yeah.
which took place in 2005 with the Museum of London.
Museum of London.
Archaeology.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
Cool.
Which features in our first hard copy newsletter
Yes.
called Putting the Wind Back in Our Sails. And the headlines give you an idea of the amount of activities and things going on in the park that year in 2005. Looking at that, you may detect a certain familiarity with the typographical and layout sort of thing. And so that's the work of Chris here, who has since developed the designs for the branded goods in our shop and other posters and Windmill guide books. And his work always brings an immediate and strong presence when we open up the shop in other locations. And recently, when we were looking at another museum in Tottenham Hale, the consultants had said we should look at that one. They had told them, look at Brixton Windmill for their branded goods and image. So, and then you'll see this picture in the middle of the archaeological dig. And it's quite funny, because looking at this photo, for those of us, well, I wasn't quite there on that year yet, but for those of us who were there organising things like this back then, to us it feels like the day before yesterday. Just consider for a moment that all the children in that first photo, they're now 20 years old. And they most likely have children of their own. And maybe some of them are still around at Rooster Park. And so it's amazing to think now there's a whole generation of people who've grown up who have had these positive experiences and memories of being in the park and around the windmill and with the family activities. And you know, compared to that picture and how it was just a few years before that, it's a real epoch-changing thing to happen, and a testament to the durable commitment of the volunteers from then to this day. And another aspect I think of this is worth mentioning is that Lambeth is, whoops, what that's going on. There's one, there's one kill, I was trying to hold the screen. Lambeth is very reputed for having quite a high turnover of population. Sometimes the churn can be almost as much as 25% of residents over a year, which I find hard to believe, but there has been that statistic, which can bring images of rootlessness and transient populations. But this project shows how deeply people care about where we live and what happens here, and enough for some to spend decades to make it thrive. In 2005, Steve Double was still the chair, and Francis James, who again I don't know or didn't meet, was the vice chair. And then again, going from the fund to the business, this was our first annual accounts, scribbled on the side of A4.
No computers.
When I contacted Steve earlier in the summer, this was his main contribution, which I thought was quite funny, really. And that you can see already the importance of grants. And that first one would have been from the Glen Gardens Resident Management Organisation. And unfailingly, they've always given us £1,000 every year since then. So, we can
So it's never increased.
It's never increased, but again, when you add it all up, 20 grand is not to be sniffed at. So, it's another thing that's proven to be really durable. And already by the next year, it made it onto a spreadsheet. You'll see quite an exponential taking off of funds through various activities going on. The grants were quite a substantial one. There's a large grant to run the events, the bigger events in the park, such as the festival. I won't go through every year's accounts, but let's just say the thing goes upwards each time. And at this time, Lambeth appointed architect Ash Sakula to consult on ideas. Ash Sakula, or Sakula.
I thought you said
and they consulted ideas for the refurbished windmill and the education and community centre. So way back then, there's already thought being put to this building. This was their master plan for the park.
Sure.
Which was pretty ambitious.
consultant.
Yes.
Swearing.
Their idea was for the windmill building to be down by the fence.
What?
Which, on an evening like tonight, would make a certain amount of sense since we still haven't got lighting sorted out. But on the other hand, I think we're very glad our support is right next to the mill, particularly with the milling going on and the open days. We're not having to lug things across the park.
Looks nice, doesn't it?
And yes, the herbaceous bit in the middle looks quite nice, and the allotments by the live-work flats. But if the stay and play still had its fenced enclosure, it's hard to imagine that we'd be able to spread out with some of the activities that take place on the grass out there. So it's probably just as well that it didn't quite happen like that. I mean, this was an image of the new building, and this play pitch would have been down the narrow sock bit of the park. So residents in the flats just beyond there, they're a bit concerned about having noise from kickabout and things going on right there. So it's interesting to see the ideas mooted. The bid was initially made to the Heritage Lottery Fund for repair of the mill and the education centre, but it didn't go through on the first attempt. They actually advised that we should drop the education building at that point, which was possibly in hindsight a good thing, because when we finally realised this building in 2019, the Friends had to go through rapid reorganisation and upskilling to be able to handle an asset rather than just have fun putting all the events on in the park. And whether we'd been ready for that back then would be an interesting question. Much of our disappointment at the time may be the slower cooked dishes had the deeper flavours, let's say. Just check what the next image is. In 2006, Adrian Garden was elected chair, this is an image from the 2006 festival, Francis James as vice, treasurer was Eileen Garden, and secretary was Susan Aldis of the Blenheim Gardens organisation, Eddie Gibb, who I don't recall meeting, Jean Kerrigan, Donna Lister, Magdalene Rubble-Carver, Richard Santieri and Andrew Weir. That summer festival had 1,400 attendees clicked on out, and included the Windmill Theatre Group's play about the history of the windmill, and it included puppets, bread making. The MP Keith Hill was there again, and Lambeth CEO Derek Anderson and Lib Peck visited. They expressed great enthusiasm about the project, but they did report to us a delay on the HLF grant application due to the change in administration at the last local election. And also crucially, that year it's the first time we ran open house. So we let people into the first 2 floors of the windmill, and we looked up through the hatches in the rather pigeon-infested.
Only on the ground floor.
Probably only the ground
And you
floor.
looked up
We
through the
looked through the
hatches.
hatches, yeah. And so Adrian Garden, who was elected chair, most of you probably know his name because he went on to become a local councillor. He couldn't be here today, but he wanted to tell us his recollections of his chairship. And so he said, when we moved to Brixton from Durham in 2001, we, my wife Eileen and I, were delighted to find there's a windmill just around the corner. Eileen took no time in getting friendly with Richard Santieri and Magdalene Rubble-Carver, who seemed to be taking the lead at that time in raising interest in bringing it back to life. She joined the newly set up Friends of Windmill Gardens, and I was asked to join when they were looking for a treasurer, as once I'd been a treasurer for a church. At some point, Steve Double moved on, or up or away, and I was asked to become chair. I remember lots of meetings with reports from several very busy subcommittees and plans being developed to apply for the Heritage Lottery funding to restore the mill. With preliminary funding, we retained several experts to produce business plans, transport plans, area surveys, analyses of the local population by age, ethnicity and diversity. I particularly remember Dr. Ian Bolton and Derek Prentice, both of Lambeth Council. Richard gave us lots of advice on environmental issues, and Derek was the project manager who oversaw the whole process. One or two personal memories I'm going to describe was sitting with Derek in a rather characterless building just around the corner from Sloane Square Station, which is also familiar to some more of us in this room, being the HLS offices, being quizzed on our submission by a Heritage Lottery Fund expert. She was incredibly complimentary, and we soon learned we had got the grant. The other memory is a conglomerate of the several open days held in the gardens organised by Magdalene. They started with a procession from the police station in the centre of Brixton, up Brixton Hill to the gardens, escorted by the police holding up the traffic. There's a long line of musicians, actors, stalkwalkers, and assorted supporters. Some in fancy dress made their slow way to the sound of drums. I think I sat in a cart pulled by volunteers. I once remember the music, including Spanish dancing, with the guitar played by Jill Ray's husband in groups of folk players who sings. But above all, I remember the play, The History of the Windmill, written by Richard, and performed in front of the windmill by him and a team of experienced actors, plus me, in the tallest top hat you've ever seen, obtained by Magdalene from the National Theatre's wardrobe, reciting a long speech I can almost but not quite remember. After these high points, I stood down to be a counsellor, and Jean then took the reins to the next stages of this successful story.
Good.
And then a little bit about the country show. It was a key fixture for our outreach work. But this, I happen to find this image in the Lambeth Archives, going back to 1975, so probably when the Parks Department was still running a little building here with schools groups coming and things. And there's this float with this impressively large Brixton Windmill making its way in through the Prockwell Park, through the Herne Hill Gate, so it'd be nice to know where that was. So we could have the small, the big and the very large. And so no, I mean a huge amount of effort must have gone into that really. And oops. And so the country show was a key feature for all the outreach work, to raise awareness and gain new members for the project. As said, over 30 new members on the first outing. So the Friends, possibly for the first time since that 1975 outing, brought the windmill to the public attention in this arena. And many people, including me, came to the project through FoWG's presence there. Which is quite funny because I've been donkey's years with the Area Forum and they've never come up the hill to find this place. Because I was exhibiting on one stand, I looked at the others and I thought, oh, right, okay, maybe I should come to this one. But it's interesting because in recent years it's become more difficult to exhibit at the country show, partly because of the fence and the extra logistical demands that it makes, and that we can't just walk in with a wheelie bag or two and set up. We have to come in the day before the country show and dismantle on the Monday afterwards. So it's all got a bit much, and so so in the last country show, hardly any of the community groups were there. So at the moment, the Brixton Society is talking to Lambeth about the possibility of having a joint marquee at the next country show where the community groups could set up little tables. With any luck, I really hope that we might get returned to the country show. And then at that time, and looking through these photos, you can see on the top left, we've got some posters in the banner, and as time goes on, the amount of materials and things that we can sell and the quality of the signage, and you can see the exponential increase in the shops there, in the information displays. So at that time, the egg gate, here we ran this very dubious egg game. It attracted people. It's basically gambling. For 20 pence, you could lift, was it 4 eggs? And they were all hollowed out eggs except for 2. If you lifted a winning egg, you earned £1.
You lucky people.
I remember some children in tears. And so, at least they can say, well, it's early lessons in the dubiousness of gambling. Yes.
Sorry,
so it's a fond memory there in the egg game, I have to say. We also started running the Art in the Park event back at that time, and it remains a favourite activity in the park. It has a very relaxed family vibe where people can sort of relax, and the big events are really nice, but it's also nice where it's quieter and people just have a good day in the park, just doing sort of slow activities. And in 2007 was when we finally, that's all right, I'm keeping an eye on the time. 2007 2007 was when we actually registered as a charity. So there's a definite time lag between getting up and running and doing all the stuff and all the nice things and doing all the administrative work slightly lagging behind, making sure that we've got the right governance structures in place and things like that. So yeah, we did catch up with the boring stuff, and so the charity was established with the three objects of saving the mill, improving the park, and having an education centre. The name Friends of Windmill Gardens was purposely chosen because the park is as important as the windmill. And so our logo, which says Brixton Windmill, alongside the charity name Friends of Windmill Gardens, says it all. So those years saw the continuation of the events. 2009 saw the acceptance of the the final acceptance of the Heritage Lottery Fund. And this was another little event we held with Dr. Ian Bolton, a tree mapping and doing tree rubbing, bark rubbing exercise with local children. That took place in 2009. And the volunteer groups had sort of roughly settled into the structure that we have now by then as well. But an extra one was formed in 2010, which was a restoration steering group formed by some people from the executives, Lambeth's officers. This was to oversee the Heritage Lottery grant process, the restoration progress of the windmill. And other people, but crucially the Lambeth officer. This was when we were introduced to Tucson Reba, who was Lambeth's project delivery officer at that time. And she's long since elsewhere, but she more recently joined us again as the current chair. So again, another example of people's long-standing commitment to the project. So the steering group managed the scope of the works for the repairs, which were extensive. But to go with that, there's a whole action plan for all the education, development and everything. So again, lots of PowerPoint presentations with all the aims, and I won't go through it all, but it just shows a snapshot of all the things one tries to plan to put into place for a successful project to run. And looking at the education things, one can see that some of the things we actually do now, and other things we don't yet, and we still aspire to do them. So they're still on the list, but it's interesting just to look back to see, yeah, we're doing some of that, and doing them well. And also from this time was the herb bed planting. So there's a bit of a time lapse. The picture on the top and the right shows the early days of the herb bed, and it shows that it was already well established in 2015, and now it has this insatiable appetite, and there's a lot of work to keep under control. But I gather there's a new project to develop the herb bed maintenance, so we're looking forward to seeing that. And so in 2010-11 saw the actual restoration. So as you can see with the headlines on that, so the education officer was appointed at that time, and the restoration, so those, that's the second page of that one. So you can see again the sheer amount of things going on in the park that we're putting on. It's astonishing really when you think about it. and that was the state of the interior before the restoration. So you can just see the bird droppings everywhere, massive cracks in the walls, and general blinds. And so the repairs were extensive. There was that's the scaffolding up when the sails were off. So there's the re-roofing of the cap, removal of all the bird muck from all the floors, replacement of some floorboards and joists, the fitting of the windows with glazing, the reopening of the first floor door, because you may have noticed in the early picture it's bricked up. And the complete reconstruction of the sails. The equipment of the equipping of the painted sails with the spring shutter mechanism, and the reconstruction of the modular mill, and that was absolutely solid with dead inside. That mill, so a few restoration pictures there.
Sure.
This one actually shows how the building didn't have any foundations, and it just sits on that London clay, which is absolutely useless for supporting buildings. So that bit was actually underpinned.
Do we know when the modular mill was last operated before it was repaired?
It was assumed when the Ashbys retired in 1937.
No, they got it working by electricity in the 60s.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So all that bird muck was just from the 60s. Right. So that shows the machine stripped down again and being put back into order, and the sails
Because
in
it
the
was
workshop.
dry stuff on stuff.
And then sequence of telescopic gradings plucking the sails on and off, so it's pretty major work. And then this looks rather astonishing now because it's rather damp and messy again inside. But that's the restored mill in its all its fine glory on the completion of the project. But the contractor, Stonewest, they actually went into receivership before the project was entirely finished. And some odds and ends actually carried on until 2013. So Ian Sesney did say it wouldn't be easy. But in 2011, the restoration was done sufficiently completely to be able to declare it open again and hold a special reopening event. The big event that day, which Adrian spoke about, was the festival and parade. Magdalene and others had organised various floats, and they would approach from the council's depot down by the market up to the high street, which would turn some heads. And meanwhile, volunteers and public who were advertised to assembled in Windmill Square. And it was a rather strange thing because with about 15 minutes to go, there weren't actually that many people there, and those of us who were there were getting rather itchy feet and worried that it's all going to be rather a damp squib. And then, just in the last 10 minutes, more and more people started arriving. And when the town hall clock struck the hour, the floats arrived and the crowd was impressively large, and the parade made its way up Brixton Hill, as you can see. So there's the top hat. He wasn't being towed along the float at that point, but he might have been in the next parade the following year. And then what was that?
On the float. Were there barrows at Brixton Market?
Yes.
I know, I pushed them.
Right.
All right.
And the top right photo, zooming in on that just gives you an idea of the complete, how we just filled up Brixton Hill pretty much. Well, the top was approaching Windmill Gardens, the bottom was probably done by Alpha Court, something like that. It was, we were just astonished that a quarter of an hour before we didn't have a clue, and then that happened. And you'll also notice a credit here to Owen Llewellyn, who was a regular volunteer. A lot of our photographs on the Flickr site are down to him, and in our publicity material as well. Oops, there's Adrian again. The opening itself, there's Chukwuma and various others. And, but crucially, as well as the Mayor of Lambeth, Christina Balcarrattle, was Henry Ashby.
Cut his head off.
Let's put his head back on. And Henry had read about the windmill being restored in the national press, and so he got in contact with us, and has also related to other friends. Viv Whittingham people know, and Prue Ashby. Viv's his half-sister, and Prue daughter. Yes, is his daughter. And so this Henry Ashby, he's the great grandson of John Ashby, who was the first miller who operated the mill from 1816 to 1845. Wow. So it's just fantastic that we could have that connection at that point. And again, I mentioned Magdalene for operating, for organising the parades. That was the first of several parades up Brixton Hill, and she organised the participation of bands from local schools, but also very importantly the council's refuse department, who put together a lot of floats that came up Brixton Hill. And I could go through reams of photographs of that as well, but that's all on our Flickr site, so I've piqued your interest. And where's Susan?
Next to, there's
that
one, and then there's Sophie, who was the architect next to her.
Oh yeah, she was the architect.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But I better move on because time is moving on. Another credit for Richard was that he was the first person who organised the guide training and how to organise the open days. And he brought quite a lot of his theatrical experience into the training sessions. We also had the help of Mildred Cookson, who's just about cut off there on the left. And she was from the Society for Protection and Maintenance of Buildings Mills section. And she came many times to help with our training sessions and to advise on how to look after the mill. And so it's very reassuring to know that we had really good experience in the form of Mildred with us. So this period saw the establishment of the monthly open days. Now we've got Keeping the Wind back in our sails for the newsletter. And again, it shows the sheer amount of activities being picked up at that point. That shows the second festival parade on the top right. Yes, Annie and Penny there, both here tonight. And so that, with the Windmill Open now, that's all the establishments of our monthly open day routine, as well as the annual events. That year we added the Harvest Festival during the open house weekend, and we later added Easter and Santa. The funding with the HLF paid for the part-time education officer who successfully implemented the primary school programme. And this was initially Lisa Rigg and then taken on by Stephen Lawler. And Stephen got much more involved with the volunteers and the events. And I gather he's back around on some of the things going on now. The urban canopy. And in 2012, a high point was gaining the Museums and Heritage Award for the category of restoration and heritage, beating some higher profile sites. And then this was our Halloween event, which we're going at that point, with Sean there, you can see. And then 2013 saw the Mill Memories project, which was a big project, and both in terms of our documentation and also the fact that it was a big grant, £9,000, when our general annual turnover was about £8,000 running the normal events and things that year. So that doubled our turnover thanks to the special project, which has always been a growing element ever since. And the Mill Memories project, it was an audio-visual, an audio display, which we had. Yes.
Kim managed that, yeah.
Yes, which we had out again last weekend at the Harvest Festival, and I saw people listening to the reminiscences on the headphones. And the project was finished with a get-together with all the contributors and a performance. And just an example from the book there, on the left is Sue Young, and her grandfather actually worked at Brixton Windmill. So she spoke about her grandfather, and that was all put together by Kim here, as well as Patsy Ham, Nancy Platt, and Dee Byrne, and that little gang also was very hot on press officer duties at that point with the comms and publicity, always putting out things. There's an astonishing array of press cuttings in that binder over there. I suggest it's well worth a look, and there's much we have to thank Kim and your gang for that. And also the sales turned for the first time that weekend. I did have a link for a video, but I don't think there's time to do that. So if you want to see the sales turning, go onto our YouTube site. And also that year, the mural in the playground was done. There was a student called Camilla Cardenusa, who, for her master's project, wanted to do a community participation mural. And this is 31 metres long and involved 100 people of all ages, who spent several weekends or weekdays painting this mural under her direction. And it was impressively good. I found it amazing because for so many people, she had an eye on the design, and she made sure the right colours of paints were available, but let everyone just get on and choose. It was up to people to choose exactly what colour leaf to do and things like that, and the whole thing worked out beautifully.
An awful lot of consultation locally for that.
Yes, and then at that phase we're also doing a lot of outreach in away locations. So we'd set up our stall in places as diverse as Windrush Square, particularly on Open Garden Squares weekends. We sometimes made an event of it with the Brixton Society. There were some Brixton Bake-Off days run by the market. There you can see, bottom right, you can see us selling our wares on Brixton Market. Thames Festival, London Open House, the Blockwall Hall Christmas Fair we often did. And also fundraising collections around Brixton Underground Station. We did that several times. And the bric-a-brac stall on Brixton Hill. So with special thanks to Anika Melody here for that. And also table tennis was installed in 2013, which was an Olympic legacy project organised by Lambeth. Randomly, 2013 was also a big year. And then the key thing about 2014 was the launch of the Flower Fund, because although the modular mill had been strictly repaired, we didn't really know if it was viable to use. That's Magda with a Wibble Carver in the centre, who was Richard Santini there. And you know, those are the two of the most important faces of the early years. And Dean, of course. Well,
I think we're all important.
Chris?
I think Penny's there too.
And Penny, yeah.
And that's
Penny?
Steve Lawler.
Yeah. Keep hold of the bucket.
and again in typically great Magdalen style, she developed, she decorated a wooden model windmill that the council had in their works, and it was sent to. There weren't many Christmas lights that year, and so it was probably the main Christmas decoration. It was out on Windmill Square. I mentioned a few names there, but some more who sort of joined the regular people around that time also include Dee Byrne, Carly Haslam, I mentioned Julie Hayes and June Stillman. Robert Adey joins us around that time. Kat Sparrow, Anthea Massey did a lot of work for us. She's very much with the Loughborough Junction Action Group now, seeing their projects through. Laura Zowli, who's with us a lot. Andy Forbes from Blockwall Bake, who's done milling activities with us on various events. And Carolyn, and Aidan Maguire, representing Windmill Gardens, but he's sadly no longer with us. And 1,208 visitors at the mill was reported as on target. The milling, the issues to check, it's quite routine now, but we had to get consultants in to check the condition of the stones, the output and running times, health and safety, legislative requirements, grain storage, moving things around the mill, food hygiene, mill lighting, maintenance, bagging up and storage. So initially we didn't have a clue. So the consultants who brought in with the flower fund money that we raised over that Christmas and subsequent months, we got it up and running, and so the photographs there were the inaugural Milling Monday, advertised for the May Day Bank Holiday in 2015. Operating the mill for the first time since probably the early 1970s, if not the 60s, after a decades-long break. And even then, you can say, well, it's milling for food production purposes rather than just demonstration milling for the first time after an 80-year break.
Wow.
And again, talking of big years, we think of 2016 as the big year because of the bicentenary, but a lot also happened in 2015. We were sharing space with what's now the Green Hut as part of the funding for the education officer. We had part-time use there, and another department in Lambeth let it to Holmwood Nursery for 7 days a week without realising we were in there half the time. So there's a stage where we coexisted very, very amicably, but we really had to do something about getting this dedicated education centre up and running. And we were on the list of beneficiaries for Section 106 money across Lambeth. That's money, the bribe money developers paid to Lambeth for community infrastructure improvements. So we called their bluff on it. It's actually in the form of a petition. It's quite an intensive petition. And we did a quick thumbnail study on where would we actually put the building. And favourites of ours would be actually to take space off next door behind the wall and knock a hole or two in the wall.
You should have done it.
Yeah. Well, we tried to contact Thames Water, but by that time they had subcontracted all their real estate matters to Savills, and we just got nowhere. Back in the really early days, when Richard was looking at his theatre group, he did actually have conversations with real human beings behind there, but that was not to be. And so, and we were looking also at a modular building that would be constructed in a factory that you could assemble, which would be one up on the porter cabin, but it wouldn't be quite like what we've got now. But we went to Lambeth in all seriousness, and this shows a prescient picture bear in mind this, most people think of this building as suddenly bubbling up in 2018-19, but this photo was 2015. I think it's Jean and Alec put those tapes out, held down by watering cans, to look at what shape and size the building might be out here. And so, trying to cut that story short now, we were lucky that Squireland Partners had just moved into Ferndale Road, and they were looking for a big project to get in with the community. And so they did all their planning work up to planning application stage for free. And so they developed this idea for the building, which, bar a few tweaks, is more or less what we see. And then another random picture of the Halloween.
I think we should mention Mark.
Yes, he's coming in the bicentennial. Yes.
He was the link
He was a link to
Yes. And also, we got the Green Flag Award that year. And again, to most people, it's just the green flag that hangs there. But what they look for is a welcoming place, health, safety and secure, clean and well maintained, sustainability, biodiversity and heritage, community involvement and management, and we can get some very big ticks with that. But again, comparing it to that first photo from before 2003, again, it's a world away. And now we come to Mark Ely and Ely Kishinito. You'll notice the flash pattern sales on the windmill. We'll come to that in a minute. Just before we get to 2016, as if that wasn't enough, as if planning for the bicentenary wasn't enough. While all that was going on, we had to draft out formal heads of terms with Lambeth about the legal status of the building and things like that, and that was a really torturous process for us. And while that was going on, the initial approaches were being made with the Heritage Lottery Resilience Fund to support the development of us from a bunch of volunteers who put on nice things into the park to people who will be able to be responsible for a building like this and the staffing of it. And if that wasn't enough, events included the big draw, our big gig, back walks and Santa's Grotto again. And the weekly Thai tea started that year. I think of it as quite a new thing, but it's already 8 years old. Also demonstrating a sustained demand. So 2016 saw the bicentenary celebrations that should be more in the living memory of more people here. Key to that was the sponsorship by Kishinito, Mark Ely, who you can see in the top right. He was the one who persuaded Squireland Partners to support us in the project with the education building. And he also paid for the celebration sales to be made with that flash pattern. You may recall that from the zebra crossings at Cold Harbour Lane and junction of Cold Harbour Lane and Railton Road. And you could also buy some extremely expensive shoes and handbags with that. So possibly subliminal advertising on their part. But we think it might have been the first time the sales had turned under canvas since 1862, probably.
Where are the sales now?
In the loft.
In the loft, they're here. We can put them back on when we want to.
Sure.
We do need a cherry picker to put them on.
Cool.
And this is some of the other special events we had in the bicentenary. The Easter egg hunt and the film show, which involves some dressing up with good old Jeff there. And yes, the treasure hunt, which was very successful with Liz there, Jeanette. And so as the
Liz helped with the treasure hunt, didn't you? All those
Yes.
difficult clues.
and then the festival and the harvest festival again there that year. So it was a big year with the events. Again, I so I'll speed up a little bit. The education officer came to an end there, but we got a small grant for facilitators to keep going with having school groups in here with one-off practitioners coming with volunteers, such as Carolyn and Jean helping as well. And so through 2017 and 18, the focus turned on to preparing for the arrival of this new building. We became then the charitable incorporated organisation, which is more suited for us to be running an asset with staff commitments and things like that. Trustees of that period, Jeff Thomas, Marita Brown, Philippa Tudor, Sona Masika and Mark Gordon joined us during that era. Construction got underway in 2019, in early 2019, thinking we'd be up and running by the autumn. It did take a while. There's a random photograph of the Beer and Bread Festival, which also got established at that time. And the Maypole, it's nice that the Maypole has regular outings in May, that Beer and Bread Festival. And the staff, Martha Rebecca, Lucy Bryden, Magdalena Kegley took up their part-time posts shortly before the scheduled completion of the building, so they camped out in the Blenheim Gardens office to start off with. But the completion got very delayed through the autumn, and well, as you know, in 2020, as the events diary melted away and the Zoom meetings took over, it was a tricky period because our entire business plan was predicated in stuffing as many people as possible into this building, into the park, as often on as many occasions as possible. So that didn't go to plan. Some more, right. So as everything closed down, Lambeth also wanted to close down the milling. So we made representations that it was food production and an essential activity. And as amply given in one of the previous talks about milling during the pandemic, it became a lifesaver for the project, both for the volunteers involved, because there probably wasn't a busier time with milling volunteers regularly turning up to do the milling. And we had the donation of the sack of grain to supply the food pantry. As I said, that's really well documented in another video on YouTube from the previous talk. But again, acknowledgement to the millers being the time Sean Wilson, Rob Bailey, Timo, Abel, Sheila Saunders, Eric, Sarah and Bodkin. But we were fortunate that we could get some mounting because one of the first uses of the buildings was a COVID place. In the September-ish of, no, it looks, there's snow there.
Spring, it was in winter.
Winter 2021, yes. And early 2021, so it was a use where we owed some rent, so the business plan wasn't entirely where it could have been. And then the end of that year, under the COVID restrictions, under the tiered restrictions, we did manage to put on a socially distant Santa. And it was wet and it was muddy and the queues went down Blenheim Gardens because it was socially distanced. But whenever I went down the queue and explained it was 1 in, 1 out because we couldn't have more than 75 people in the park. People there, they're just so appreciative that we were there to put something like this on. And they said, I don't care how long it takes for us to get something to say that. So that was really touching. So since then we've been ramping up events and things in here with more Tai Chi sessions, the Thursday club that's been established. And so we're really using the building now more and more. I haven't yet tallied this up with our original service level agreement in terms of how often we do certain things in here. But I think we're probably well on the way, if not possibly there. And fundraising has been crucial to our success. And this is an abridged version of our fundraising tracker. It goes right back to that first 5,000 for Festival 2005, and then it picks up with many similar sums for festivals and things like that, and then suddenly it jumps up with Big Lottery Fund and various other larger sums like 19,000 for park improvements in 2013, so that's possibly behind the curve. And so it goes on to this present day. And some of you might have noticed on the right-hand side, there's a much repeating name, Donna Lister, who's in our fundraising group. A big acknowledgement to her. You'll see it's more diversified the later we get, because Catherine now does some of this work. She's still there. They're part of our fundraising group. I didn't realise she went back to the beginning when I got this list out. So it's another example of people sticking around. And she obviously has a knack, but she couldn't do it without the support of the group. So it takes the group behind it to do it, to bounce ideas off, supply information. But it's also another example of the way volunteers work. People will put in what time they can for the different roles. There's no model or right way of doing it. It's what you want to do, what interests you. And we're very lucky that Donna was interested in this side. And so, as we're coming towards the end, there will be many names that I have missed out, but by the same token, many of you probably would have heard of Donna Lister, and yet she's very much part of the success of the organisation. And although we have staff, we still live by the volunteer roles. And just to very quickly recap the volunteer roles, the guiding, stewarding, baking, grilling, the cafe, the shop, the events, the gardening, communications and partnership, fundraising, education, our maintenance added to that list. We are always looking for new volunteers, because there's always a turnover of people. But this sheer variety of things, it's a real strength, because the variety of activities, that sheer variety of roles, it does attract people with different interests. And so it's lovely to have so many different people with different walks of life working here with us. But it's also one of the big challenges, trying to bring this all together in a coordinated way with coordinated scheduling, knowing having one hand knowing what the other hand is doing, and having everyone feeling part of the whole and fully acknowledged. And it's very difficult often to get the big picture. So that's why I wanted to sort of recap there. And as part of that challenge, as part of the latest grant funding, we're introducing an online system in which volunteers can book their activities with the benefit of seeing who else is putting in for that activity, so people can see who else is doing what and when. And also there'll be a facility for everyone to be updated with any briefing information and things like that. So we're hoping that will sort of take us to the next level with some of the challenges of organising this sheer amount of stuff that we do. So anyway, rewinding back to 20 years ago, who would have thought we'd have been in this space, doing these things? It's a remarkable testament to hundreds of people, the visions and passions of those who started it, and the fact that the Brixton Area Forum enabled people to do some hard work, very well supported by the council, right back at the beginning. And before I end, I'll just say, as part of our 20 years celebration, tonight's the last opportunity to get 20% off.
If you remember.
Well, let's see what the next 20 years bring.